My personal history with programming started back in 2006 on this machine. Well, we didn't come much farther than ASCII art, but this is where I learned to type. I did a typing course in 2006, and we learned how to do proper touch typing. Meaning I could find any key on the keyboard with just my fingers, and I didn't have to look at the keyboard. And if you do that with the proper technique, you have your fingers normally on the home row, and then you can basically move from there. And I'm proud to say, I was the fastest typist in the class. I was not the most accurate, but at least I was the fastest. So there's that. Now, skip forward to 10 years later, in 2016. By this, I was very into competitive programming. So basically, teams gather to solve problems as quickly as possible, and being able to type fast really helped me there. There were some rules, though. Every team was allowed to bring a keyboard, only one. Well, we didn't need any because there were keyboards on the table. I was like, why would you ever bring your own keyboard? And we were basically playing on hard mode. We were using C++, no auto-completions, no internet, of course. And we were actually laughing at other people that needed an IDE to program because, well, we were doing the real deal. So, 3 years later, 2019, I switched from competitive programming into corporate programming. And I landed my first job. Well, all was nice and good. I was basically able to make from my hobby my work. So I was very happy, except that at this point, I was basically behind computers and typing for over half my life. And that was starting to catch up on me. So at this moment, I was starting to feel some injuries in my hands. Things began to hurt. After a day of typing, I basically wasn't able to do anything else. And, well, I had a lot of other hobbies as well. So I like to go bouldering. That wasn't really an option anymore. Also gaming, yeah, you use your fingers for that. That didn't really work. Smartphones, you hold them in your hand. Well, I can't live without those, so I kept it. But even holding a book or an e-reader, that was already a bit straining for me. So I was in a bit of a pickle because all of this happened within the first year of my professional career. And I was like, how do I solve this? Do I need to change the way I type? Do I need to switch careers? Do I just do meetings from now on, no typing? So what I did was I made some resolutions, and next year everything was going to be better. Well, maybe not everything in 2020 was better, but at least we were able to work from home at this point, and that's the moment I decided, well, to heck with all of this, I'm going to use my keyboard, I'm going to change everything that I want, and I'm going to make it comfortable for me. So skip forward to today. This is the keyboard that I'm using right now. You can see it's basically hanging together from wires and Legos. It doesn't even have letters on it anymore, but this is what I use today. And I can say today I can actually work full day and do all the hobbies, so that's all very nice. Welcome to Confessions of a Shortcut-a-holic, where I will confess that today and actually every day I use my own keyboard and I bring those to events. I also do use an IDE now. I'm no longer hardcore. I even use Copilot. But most of all, I am very addicted to optimizing and customizing my keyboard. So I tell you about the journey today. There is one thing that I do need to say, though. If you experience any of those kind of pains or anything like that, please don't listen to me. Go to an expert and consult those, because I'm not a health expert. I just like to talk about keyboards and customize that. That being said, I think there's something in there for everybody that could be interesting, not only if you have those kind of injuries. So let's look at the program. I have some basics to go over. Then we talk about shortcuts in the hardware section. Well, we'll actually talk about keyboards and stuff, and there's some way to optimize those later in the later section. And in every section, I have a question for you. And it's a dilemma. Would you rather that A, none of the keys on your keyboard do whatever is printed on them, or B, you can only type with your index fingers. You can only use 2 fingers for typing. So it's a dilemma, obviously, so none of the options you might like. But if you had to choose, who would go for option A? And who would go for option B? All right, I'll come back to this question at the end of the section, but we'll discuss it then. So the first thing that actually started to hurt for me was related to this picture with the touch typing where you use all the different fingers. And as you can see, especially the right pinky has a lot of work to do here. And if you compare that to your thumbs, those are 2 fingers for just 1 button, whereas the pinky has like over 10 in this picture. And actually that was the first thing that I started to notice. Like fingers on the right side of my hand had to stretch a lot to go to enter and backspace, and that was the first problem. So looking at this picture, I flagged some of the keys that I used quite a lot, but actually are pretty far away from that home row if you do touch typing. And I was like, can I find a better position for these keys so that everything becomes a little bit more comfortable? And then starting with the escape key, it's all the way on the top left. But what if, instead of over there, you put it on the place where your caps lock key is normally? And if you put it there, that becomes your escape key. And it's much closer to where your fingers are. And it's still the same finger, it's still kind of the same direction, so it's kind of easy to start with. And the reason I'm starting with this one is actually if you are on a Mac, you can do this from your settings. You don't need to install anything. This you can try right away and see if you like it or not. On the other side of the keyboard, we have the Enter key, which is used considerably more than the Escape key. But even for that one, you have to kind of stretch a bit. So what if you put it right on the home row, on where the semicolon usually is, and put your Enter key there? Then you can just type it from wherever you are. This might not work for everybody because, well, a semicolon, especially in Java, you use at the end of every line. So you might also want to type that. I don't really recommend doing it the other way around, where your big Enter key becomes a semicolon, because that's a key that you like to hit often, right? But what if you look at the semicolon and you see, well, it's basically made up of a period and a comma. So what if I type those 2 buttons at the same time, and then it becomes a semicolon? So it kind of makes sense to me, and they are also right next to each other, so it's easy to do. And in this way, you are like mapping stuff, and you're making a combo out of multiple things. And this you can't do from the Mac settings, but you need to install some program. So I'm giving an example here for Windows. If you're on Windows, you can install a program called AutoHotkey, and there you can also map things like this, where you say, oh, my semicolon is now an Enter, or the combination of 2 keys becomes something else. So we can see we already are working towards something where the keys are not really doing what they say that they are doing. But the last example, backspace. So that was the one that hurt me the most. So that is pretty far off to the right. And well, as I said, I'm not the most accurate typist. That one I used a lot. So I also thought of a way to improve this and to put this on a better key. And what I did was I put it on the key left of my spacebar. And I made that the backspace key. And this, to me, that kind of makes sense. If I want to go forward, I use space. And if I want to go back, I use the key that's on the left of that. And actually, I use my thumb for that as well. So my thumbs get a little bit more action. One problem, though, especially on a Mac, that is normally where the command key is. And you use that also quite a lot for shortcuts. And you don't really want to lose that. But if you think about it a little bit more, you realize that, well, shortcuts you only do when you hold down the command key and then you press another key. So what if you combine this behavior? What if you make the key so that if you hold down the backspace key, it becomes a command key and you can do shortcuts. But if you only tap it once, it's your backspace. And this is called a mod tab, so a modifier and a tab behavior, and you combine it in one key. And look, this is an example on Mac how you do that. So you can install a Carabiner Elements program. And there, this last line is where you say, oh, if I only tap it once, then it becomes backspace, and otherwise it's just my command key. So looking at what I did, I basically got all the keys that were far away, and I put them closer to where my fingers usually are. So obviously, when I look back at this picture, I went for option A. But I actually did think about option B, not necessarily with just my index fingers, but typing with less fingers. Maybe I don't strain them too much and move them outwards, because it was mostly my pinky that was hurting. So actually, for both of them, it's something to say. I just went in direction A. Moving on to the next section means I do have another one of those dilemmas. Would you rather that A, you are forced to use keyboard shortcuts when they are there? So you cannot click on a button, but you have to use a shortcut if it is available. Or B, you have your Enter key on your mouse, which is basically the anti-shortcut, because, well, at the end of every line, you have to move to your mouse and then back. So again, if you had to choose, who would go for option A? And who would prefer option B? Okay, so mostly shortcut users over here, I see. So at this point, when I fixed like the first issue that I had, typing became more comfortable for me. But I still had some issues like using my mouse. That was also kind of straining. So I was like, I basically want to be a programmer that can just use a keyboard and mostly that, and not use the mouse too often. It's also more efficient if you don't like switch too often. And if you want to do that, in my opinion, if you only want to use your keyboard, you basically need 3 ingredients. First one is you need to be able to manipulate text. You need to learn application shortcuts. There's not really a way around that. And you need to be able to switch between applications. And if you can do those 3 things, I'd say you're basically 80% there. So I'm going to deep dive into them a little bit more deeply. So if you want to manipulate text, obviously you need to be able to type. And it really helps if you can find all the buttons without looking at the keyboard, because, well, you're not slowed down, basically. But if you already type something and you want to change it, it also helps to know some shortcuts there. So obviously, if you have your cursor at the end and you want to go left, you just push the left button. And if you actually hold down a modifier, you can go back to the beginning of the word. And the command modifier, different one, lets you skip to the beginning of the sentence. And you can combine these with also holding down Shift, for example, and then you select multiple things at the same time. Or you can use backspace and you backspace multiple things. So manipulating text. Basically, it's not just about typing, but be able to manipulate all the text in your program. And that helps you in any program that you work that has text. You can also use Vim for this, for example. But I like the arrow keys because they are everywhere available and you don't have to install any extensions or something. But that's basically, you need to be able to do that. Then application shortcuts. I'm not going to give you a list of all my favorite shortcuts of every application that I own. But if I had to choose one shortcut that you need to know, it's one that gives you access to all the other shortcuts in an application. So as an example, in IntelliJ, you can use Command-Shift-A or Control-Shift-A on Windows, and you can search for all the commands there. And they will tell you what the shortcut is, so next time maybe you do know the shortcut. And similarly on VS Code, it's Command-Shift-P. And if you're an Obsidian user for nodes, you can use Command-P, and then again, you can find all the shortcuts. And most modern applications have some kind of way to either view the shortcuts or search through them. So if you use that, then it becomes a little bit more easy to transition. And then lastly, switching between applications. Now there is the shortcut Alt-Tab or Command-Tab on Mac. That basically lets you switch between all your most recently used applications. I don't really like this one, because depending on how recently you use an application, you need to tap it multiple times. And what I always preferred was the next one, which is holding down the Windows button and then use a number. And it lets you activate that numbered application on your taskbar. And you can pin those positions. So for me, it was always, number 1 was always my browser, number 7 was always my code editor and stuff like that. So those were really ingrained into my mind, like, oh, I want to go to the application, I just press that number. But then for work, I had to switch to Mac. And Mac didn't have that. And I searched for a solution, and I tried Spaces for a while. It didn't really work. Eventually, I did find one. I wrote a blog post about that. You can read it if you want. But what it basically comes down to is the ability to create some custom shortcuts, and you want those to not conflict with all the shortcuts that are already in applications, because otherwise you might get stuck in one and you can't leave it anymore. And the way you do that is by something called hyper. And hyper is basically a combination of all the modifiers on your keyboard. You hold those down, and then use another button to create a shortcut that's custom. And it's very uncomfortable and very inconvenient to do, so you can be sure that there's no application out there that does that. So obviously it's not perfect because, well, like I said, it's uncomfortable. But there's a way around that, because you can map that to one key on your keyboard. And if you hold down that key, that becomes then that hyper modifier, and then you have access to all your keys. And here on this picture, I show you the spacebar. So this again is one of those mod tab things where if you just press it, it's a spacebar, but if you hold it down, it becomes the hyper modifier and you can use all your shortcuts. And there's 2 reasons why I recommend spacebar for that. The first one is you have your thumbs on that, and you can use either thumb for your shortcut. So you have it right available. And also, because this is the hyper key, your spacebar becomes a hyper spacebar, which just sounds awesome. So obviously that's the real reason. And I'm going to give a quick demo of what it would look like if you were just using your keyboard. So and the keyboard shortcuts will show on the screen. So if I switch to my browser, you can see there that I used some shortcut, and if I go back to the demo, well, it's a different one. Here I have some blog posts, and well, there's someone talking about mouse shortcuts over there. I don't know what that's about. So it's talking about keyboards. But obviously, you can browse through your browser with just your arrow keys, for example, to browse. And if you have another tab open, you can switch with that with some keyboard shortcut. And if I want to take a note on this, maybe I want to copy the link. Oh, it's the wrong one. Use Command L, copy the thing. Then I go to my note-taking application, and let's say blog about neurodiversity. And yeah, let's say I want to insert a link here. Well, there's some shortcuts that you need to know, but then there you go. So basically, I can switch between applications, type stuff quickly, manipulate text, and also things like putting things on half my screen. I use the same kind of hyper shortcut modifier to go there. So that's basically the idea. You have some way of doing your thing on your keyboard. So looking back, I don't really like option A, to be fair. It's good to learn shortcuts, to be forced to do it, but when I am in mouse mode, basically when I'm holding my mouse, I don't want to be forced to go back to my keyboard and then back to my mouse just for that one shortcut. And there is actually something to say about B. So you can also modify your mouse behaviors and those kind of things. I don't have time to talk about it, but there's that blog post. But anyway, options are there. I still also have my enter key on my keyboard, of course. I don't just put it on my mouse. So next topic, hardware. Keyboards and all of that. Another dilemma. Would you rather have a keyboard that A, has too few keys, or B, too many keys? We would go for option A. And I will go for option B. Before I dive into all the keyboards, let's give me a brief overview of the history of keyboards. So if I would ask you today, what does a phone look like? Well, you would come up with a picture like this, basically a modern smartphone. And a picture of a keyboard today would look like something like this. If you go back about 20 years, though, in the year 2000, this was state-of-the-art phone. And the keyboard looked a little bit like this. This one has been used a bit, but you can see all the keys are there. It's a bit bulkier, but basically the same thing. But if we go back further, to the year 1960, this was a typical phone, and this was the state-of-the-art keyboard. You can see we lost some keys over there, but basically, I guarantee everybody here would be able to work on a keyboard like this. But if we go back even further, to 1878, this is a picture of the first phone. I wouldn't be able to tell you how this worked, but I would be able to type on this keyboard right here. So this is a Remington 2, came out that year. It has the same layout. Basically, if you look at the history, you can see that phones in the last 150 years changed a lot, and keyboards, maybe not that much. And the comparison is a bit unfair because, well, there's a lot of technology in phones, and the technology behind the keyboard is mostly in the machine that you use it with. But what I think is interesting that, like, every time the technology of a phone changed, also the way you interacted with the machine changed. Nobody's saying right now, oh, I want that dial rotary back on my iPhone. But for keyboards, either everything was perfect from the start, or something else is going on here. So looking at that modern keyboard right here, one thing that did change was there's a lot more keys now. Basically, the keyboard is very big, especially on the right side. It has extended a lot. And of course, if you like, you can customize that these days. So you can go for a smaller keyboard. This is more like the size of what you have on a laptop. Or you can go even smaller. This is one that doesn't even have arrow keys, but it's an option. And basically, you can choose whatever you like. And you can customize anything about a keyboard. So you can choose colors, you can choose keycaps, you can choose lighting. Even the switches that are behind the keys, you can basically customize and modify them to your liking. This is also something that people have strong opinions about. Some want keys to really click, and others prefer silent keys for when they work in the office, or maybe not, but up to you. And there are many options. Like, so you can customize your keyboard exactly the way that you like it, and I don't have time to go into all the topics. But there's one that I wanted to point out. So if you have a keyboard, you can also do this to it, and basically break it down in the middle. And for me, I really wanted this, and there were some ergonomic reasons for that. So first of all, if you have a keyboard like that, like on a normal keyboard, you would have to basically bend your arms to be able to type normally. But on a split keyboard, you can align them like whatever makes it comfortable for you, and you can also change angles and those kind of things. And the other reason is that on a flat keyboard, this is something that you can try out yourself, if you would normally lift your hands, they would be vertical. But if you want to type, you have to rotate them, and you are already stressing a muscle there in your forearms. So I really wanted a keyboard where I can be a bit more in a natural position. And if I already think about typing like this, I notice my shoulder stands up, and when I go to a position like this, well, everything relaxes. So to me, that makes more sense. So that's the first thing I did. I wanted a split keyboard. But there's more. So again, if we compare the old keyboard to the new keyboard, there's another thing that's very similar to both of those, and that is that the keys are all aligned diagonally. On the old typewriters, that really was a must, because, well, the hammers couldn't be on the same position. But on a keyboard today, there's not really a reason to do that, because they all send an electrical signal to your machine. The only reason to do that is because people are used to having a keyboard like that, but apart from that, there's not really a reason. And actually, if you think about it, like fingers are very good at moving like this, but moving sideways, that is way more straining for your hands. You can get keyboards that have everything aligned straight, so that actually it's the more natural position. I always get a bit dizzy with this picture, and I thought it had to do with the space bar being split up as well, but then somebody told me, well, it's all because it's in a grid, and well, don't look too much at it. But again, this picture is a keyboard with straight keys, and you can also split that into two things. So again, you have a split keyboard, but then with everything straight aligned. But if you think about it a little bit more, you might realize that not all your fingers are the same length. So what if you get a keyboard where all the keys are more aligned with those specific fingers? And this only kind of makes sense if you use all your fingers for typing. If you use less fingers, that's obviously fine, but then yeah, for this one you have to move more, so that doesn't really make sense. But if you do that, this is an option. For me personally, this was still a little bit too big. I like less keys, so I ended up with a keyboard like this. So this is what I use today. And this is an open source keyboard. It's called a Ferris Sweep. You can go to the GitHub link, and you will download these PCB files, and you can send them to a manufacturer, and they ship to you the PCBs. Then you have to solder some keys on that, put some nice keycaps with colors, and then you end up with a nice keyboard. And because it's open source, other people make nice accessories. So here's a picture of someone that made a 3D printed carrying case for it, and obviously myself, I did some things with Legos and those kind of things. So looking back at that first question, would you rather have too few or too many? Well, the real answer is that you can choose whatever makes sense to you, how many keys you want. But there's more than size. Like there's all kinds of things that you can customize. So I hope I gave you some ideas of what that could be. Final topic though, layers and layouts. So again, I have a question. Would you rather have no mouse buttons? You can still move your mouse, but you cannot click on the buttons. Or B, no arrow keys on your keyboard? Who would go for option A? And option B, a little bit more divided this time. Again, I'll come back to it. But you might be wondering, when you saw this picture, like, how do you even work on this? Because, well, it only has letters and a couple symbols, but I still need to be able to program and use all my other symbols as well. And the answer to that is a thing called layers. And the easiest way I can show you that is by this picture, where this is a keyboard on a phone, where also that one has very few keys. It only has letters normally, but if you click a button, then they become symbols and letters. And you can do the same thing with a keyboard if you want that. So here's a digital picture of my keyboard. And normally it looks like this, but when I hold down that thumb button on the left there, then it basically becomes completely different. So all my keys change to something else. And here I have my arrow keys on the right and my modifier keys on the left. And they are right on the home row, so they are where my fingers are. And now I use this to be easy, quickly manipulate text and go backwards and those kind of things. And if I release the button, it just goes back down to a normal keyboard. And how do you do that? There's two answers. So the first one is if you get one of these custom keyboards, you don't have to build them yourself completely. You can just buy them off the shelf as well. But if you have one of those, most of them are programmable. So you can change all the keys on your keyboard to do exactly what you want. So everything I showed before, that you can do that either on software level or on the keyboard itself. And nice thing about that is if you bring your keyboard to another place, it still works. If you don't have that, or you want to use it on a laptop keyboard, for example, you can install a program called Kmonad. This is an open source cross-platform application, so it works everywhere. And this lets you define layers of your keyboard. So as a quick example, and it works with any keyboard. So if your keyboard looks like this, you can define it in a text file. These are my keys normally, and then you can just define a different layer, and that does whatever you want. So this one would be the same as the picture that I showed you before. And if you want to try it out, I always recommend starting simple with just something like this, where it's just arrow keys and modifiers. But after that, if you are used to it, you can add more stuff. So I have my normal shortcuts there as well, and some home and end buttons. And on the left side, I also added my escape button, and actually I put my mouse buttons also on my keyboard, which means that I do that thing where I move my mouse with my right hand and I use the mouse buttons on the left side so I can balance the load a little bit. And similarly on the right side, when I hold down my right button, my keyboard basically becomes a numpad, so I can type all the numbers. And numbers on a normal keyboard, I never learned that in the typing course, how to type those, and I still have to look down at my keyboard every time I type a number. But now on a numpad, I don't have that problem, and actually, my keys don't show anything, so I have to remember. But for this, it makes more sense to me. And on the left side, I have all my symbols, so that actually I can do all my work on a keyboard like this. So looking back at the question, I actually went both options, but it is something that you can experiment with and basically customize whatever you want to your liking. It's not the final thing, though. There's one more thing that I did, and that has to do with the layout of the keyboard. So when I first learned to type, or actually when I first interacted with computers and I couldn't really properly touch type yet, my first question was, why are all the letters mangled up? Why doesn't it just go A, B, C, D, all of that? But because then at least I would be able to find all the keys more quickly, and now it was all a mess. And the answer that I got was it went a little bit like this. On those early typewriters, they actually had layouts that were alphabetical. But the issue was that people were so fast at typing then that all the hammers got mangled up. So they fixed that by basically going to a QWERTY layout, where everything is less optimized, people were slower at typing, and the problem was solved. Well, that's the story. It's not really true. Actually, I looked at a heat map of what an alphabetical keyboard would be. So the most used letters are in red here, and you can see that it's basically all over the place. So I don't really believe that people were that fast on this keyboard. Some very often used keys were next to each other, but at least it's not really doesn't really look that efficient. And if you compare that to a heat map of a QWERTY layout, you can see that there's actually a little bit more structure over here. Strangely though, most of the frequently used keys are on the top row, not on the middle row. But I would say 150 years ago, they didn't really make that distinction. But at least it is better than the other one. And there are other options, like you can also type on AZERTY. That is, I think in French they use that. But it's basically the same thing. So again, it's a little bit more structure, but not really the best. These days you have other options though. If you want to, you can change the whole layout of the keyboard to something else. This is a Dvorak layout. And now you can see that all the most used keys are on that home row, right where your fingers normally would be. And also for this, you have plenty of options. So this is another picture. This is Colmac. Again, it's a very optimized layout. And what I use is a variant of the one that you see here on this picture. And they all have the same property, where the most used keys are on that home row. And it's very comfortable to type on. And there are a couple reasons for that. They are here on the screen. So basically, you reduce your finger travel, and you don't use the same finger in a row too much, and you balance the load and those kind of things. And what it turns out is that if you type like this, it's very comfortable. But there are some downsides. So this takes a long time to learn. like if you think back of learning to type at the first time, you basically have to start from scratch again. And now your keys don't even tell you anymore what they are, unless you also swap those around on your keyboard. It's also not faster. If you want to be able to type faster, don't do this, because this is made for comfort, not for speed. I would say going too fast on the keyboard anyway is not comfortable in any case. So, but it's not made for that. You can also no longer really type on a normal keyboard, unless you also practice that still, but I really can't type on QWERTY anymore. You have to really learn all your shortcuts. It only makes sense if you use all those fingers at the first place, otherwise, well, it might not be better. And when I say most used keys, I only mean the English language. If you're typing in a different language, well, then again, the layout might not even be better. So those are all kind of things that you have to consider before diving into this. Also, if you do it, please make sure you can type your password, because otherwise you are you're in a bit of a pickle. But if you still want to try it, then I have one recommendation. So, like I said, there are many options of those different layers that you can choose. So how to choose? Because, well, you have to learn it for like 3 months before you can decide whether you like it or not. What I recommend is going to this website. It's called Keyboard Layout Tryout. If you go there, you can basically map whatever keyboard you currently have on a software level to the other keyboard. And then it lets you try out what it would feel like to type on that layout. So here you can go to this page. It will show you what words you are typing on the bottom row. But on the top row, you are actually typing those letters on your keyboard. So you can see here on this picture, you type a lot of F, J's, and semicolons, because those are on good positions on your keyboard. So you would be typing like this. And I have a video of me showing you what it would look like. So this is me typing on a QWERTY layout, and like I said, I can't really do that anymore. So I am currently looking at my keyboard and finding the keys, and I'm also not using all my fingers. But just as a demo, I'm typing some words, and you can see I have to basically move my hands a lot. And now I'm showing you same text typing, but now now I'm using proper touch typing. So I'm using all my fingers. It's still on QWERTY though. I'm using that same layout tryout to basically map back my keys to whatever QWERTY was. But you can see it's more efficient. Also my speed increases, and my hands move a little bit less. And now I'm typing on that optimized layout. So this is what I would normally type at. I'm not using my current keyboard, but you can see that still my hands move even less, speed increases, and you can see me sometimes stretching to the shift key, but that's about it. And now my fully custom keyboard with all the Legos and stuff, you can see that my hands basically don't move at all. My fingers are all right on the keys where they need to be. And there's one thing I didn't tell you. I'm no longer typing just words. I'm fully programming on this keyboard. This is me actually doing some coding. So I'm using all the symbols, auto completions, shortcuts, those kind of things. And I can basically do my whole job on this keyboard. So for me, currently, that's the end of the road at this moment. I have talked about a lot of options, though. So I thought it would be fun to do something where I would tell you what I recommend and what I don't recommend. So I made a tier list. So I wanted to show all the things that I tried. And the very first thing that I learned was how to do touch typing, so not looking at my keyboard. I do really recommend being able to type without looking at your keyboard. Maybe not necessarily with all the fingers and the keys that are that far apart, but I do really recommend that, especially in our line of work. It does take some learning if you can't do it though, but I'm putting it on A tier, meaning that if I really recommend it to everybody, I would put it on S, and if I don't really recommend it, it would go to B, and in the middle, to try it out, but see if you like it or not. Then mapping your keys to become something else. This is the combo with the semicolon and the period thing. Again, I would say try it out. Might not be for everybody, but it can optimize some things. And then changing the whole layers of your keyboard with 2 different things. I'm going to put it after the normal ones because this is a little bit more work. It takes even more learning, but then again, you can then find all the keys that you would normally not be able to find on your keyboard. So I'm putting it there. The keyboard shortcuts to quickly move between applications, especially if you are on Windows or Linux, it's right there. You can just use it. I'd say S tier. And this is the custom keyboard where you can customize anything to your liking. I think that's really important. for some people, that might just be I'm using a Magic keyboard from Apple because it's completely the same as my Mac laptop, and that's completely fine. I'd say choose whatever works for you, but having a proper keyboard that can really help you. Then there's the Hyperspace keyboard. Well, obviously that's S tier. And then we come to the very custom keyboard. Well, this one I made myself, but it's like having a split keyboard and those ergonomic things I recommend, but this one, well, still it has all the fingers that are aligned and those kind of things. I do recommend it, but maybe less so than the other things. And then finally there's the, well, the keyboard layout change. Can't really recommend it, but if you do, and after some time you get used to it, it is very nice, but don't start with that. That's basically what I'm saying. So when I look back at this journey, I basically started from someone that was like, why would you ever spend hundreds of euros on a keyboard that just makes a lot of noise? And now I'm someone with the weirdest keyboard in the office, and I can't even use anything else. So it's all very personal, and especially in this line of job, like choose whatever makes sense to you. But what I would say, like, why would you choose hardware or something like that that's 150 years old just because it's convenient and it's lying around? You'll spend thousands of hours with your keyboard. So to any developer out there and anybody that works with keyboards, I'd say make every keystroke count. Thank you. So I think we do have some time for questions left. And also, if you are interested, here are the blog posts. Any questions? I have a question over there.
Wireless one you were using, and how did you attach the keyboard or the tilting mechanism?
So indeed. So the question is, am I using a wireless keyboard? This one is not wireless. It's wired. So it's also connected to my keyboard, to my laptop. And how did I attach them to the tenting mechanism, so the Lego thing? It's actually not. It's completely separate. But the Lego thing I just made because I had it lying around, and I was looking for other options, and they were very expensive. And I was like, well, why not try something myself? But yeah, they are not attached to each other. This is also, it doesn't have a case, so it's still all the PCB and wires and stuff. Sorry?
Are you available later to prepare keyboard layouts?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, of course. If you want to talk keyboards, come over, yeah. Any other questions? We have a question, yes.
I was quite curious because I also like shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
I, for example, use Launchy to easily start up applications that are not easy to find by Windows.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other things you talk the most about how to make typing more comfortable?
Right.
Do you have also tips for people who want to make typing faster, except for working faster?
Yeah, so indeed, so the three things I talked to you about, like manipulated text, changing applications, and application shortcuts, those are mostly for working efficiency, not necessarily for comfort. But yeah, you kind of need to have some way of interacting quickly with your applications, and basically switching between mouse and keyboard, that can really slow you down. So having the option to be able to do everything that you want on a keyboard without having to go to your mouse is a really good option. But also, like I said, the other way around. When you do have your mouse in your hand because you're dragging and dropping stuff, for example, you don't want to be forced to move back to your keyboard just to go to a different application. You kind of want to be in the zone and just use whatever you have currently available. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but it's a good attempt.
Good attempt. Okay, well, we can discuss later if you want to know more. Another question.
You said about the switching layout that you have a button that you hold to switch a layout. What do you think about pressing a button to switch a layout, just like caps lock, that you press to switch?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can do either on a keyboard. So if you want to switch between those layouts, you can hold down the button to go to a different layout, like I told you. But also, indeed, you can just press a button and then it goes completely to that layout. Personally, I don't really like it because you can't, especially because I can't see what my keys are. If I just press a button and I start typing, you notice that with caps lock, right? If you press it accidentally and all your keys change. So personally, I don't like it, but it is an option. I might try it at some point. And you have a comment on that, I think. Hyperkey, yes.
From Microsoft to start Office programs, you better use it without the Windows one, the net.
Okay.
That's free. On Windows Hyper, forget it. Some keys are used by Office.
Right, so indeed, so not all the 4 modifiers, but just 3 of them, because otherwise you get conflicts. Okay, good to know. I've never tried it on Windows, but good tip for everybody that does. Yeah. Another question.
If I understood correctly, you are to press the enter button, you need to press first one button to change the layer, press enter, and then change it back to the current layer, right? With your current setup.
Well, you really paid close attention. So, yeah. Yeah, so indeed. So question is, do I need to move layers for just my enter key? And the answer, I don't think I even showed on the slide. Maybe I did. But yes, I do currently have to do that, because what I do is I use my left thumb and my right thumb to do the enter key. And that really starts to annoy me. So that is something that I want to optimize. But that's a good question. Like, do you, keys that you use often, do you really want that on a different layer? So for me, I really like everything close to me, but if you use keys a lot and you don't want to change layers every time, of course you can go to a keyboard that is a little bit bigger and there you have all the keys. So again, don't just do what I said, but do whatever makes sense to you. Another question, yes?
So you have the modifier keys on a different layer than the letter keys, so how do you actually use them?
Yeah, very good question. So let's show that slide. So I basically I lied to you. That's the short answer. So I have the modifier keys on a different layout. Let's go to this one to switch quickly. So indeed, my modifiers are in this picture on a different layout than my normal keys are. But actually, this picture is not really true because I'm using a different layout from the start. So that's the first thing. But there's 2 ways you can do that. So you can either make these modifier keys sticky, where you just tap them once, and then the keyboard remembers, oh, you will use the command key, for example. And then you can go to any letter and just press that. So if you want to do Command A, for example, in this picture, you tap Command once, then go back and then tap the A button. So that is a way to do it, and that's how I started out. So actually, when I first tried out new layers, that's what I did. So I had these sticky modifiers, which were right there, and I could use any shortcut to go there. The real answer that I use today is most of the keys here, I have some kind of custom thing with the mod tab behavior. So my normal letters, my ASDF in this picture, if I tap them, they are the letters, but if I hold them down, they become the modifiers. So I don't even have to go to a different layer. I can just use the modifiers right from there. That's called home row mods, but yeah, that's what I do. Another question.
I saw you have your layer tabs on the same hand where you also press keys. Isn't that painful? I use them cross always. I never...
Right. So you're asking, like, if you, for example, the numpad thing, if you have to hold down the button with your right hand and also use the keys there. So I tried both. So I also tried holding down my left thumb and then use the numbers on the right. But I also, like I said, I also often have still used my mouse on my right hand, and then I want to be able to do the things on the left. And on the right, it actually helps me to basically keep my hand on the keyboard for the numpad. I just noticed it makes sense to me. But indeed, you sometimes do have to stretch your hand a little bit, but still my keyboard is very small, so it's not that bad. But it's something to consider. If you want to do that, you can also do that, like have your layers on a different hand than the ones that you use. Yes, another question. Ah, yeah. Yeah, good question. So my phone layout, is that still QWERTY or not? So which one did you have, sorry? Okay, call Mac on your phone. Yeah. So do I change my layouts on my phone? I did. I actually used Call Mac on my phone as well. I used a different keyboard for that. But then at some point, so I first started with Call Mac and then I actually went back to QWERTY, and on my phone, I do use QWERTY now. And that's also because the memory is very different. Like I'm just typing with both of my thumbs, and also I can see the letters right there. So actually, I like that. And what I actually noticed on Colmac is that a lot of the letters that you use in sequence are right next to each other, and that's very nice on the keyboard where you can basically roll down your fingers to type a word. But if you're using two thumbs, it is very annoying to do that with one. You can do that also on your phone keyboard. I just noticed that for me, QWERTY is okay. I just try to avoid typing on my phone as much as possible. That's the way I solved it. Yeah. Any other questions? And if not, then thanks again. And let's move to the next one.